I'd been dancing tango with my radiator for 6 months. My daughter had been out of school since March, her exams cancelled, her prom vanished. My son's university life interrupted, his job gone, and we were not alone. They were telling us that if we stayed at home, we were saving lives. But were we? We were told we were all in it together apart. As a relationship counselor, my caseload had seamlessly transferred onto Zoom, so I was not affected job-wise. However, the stories of livelihoods destroyed, domestic violence rising, stress, anxiety and depression growing multiplied in my consulting room. When they announced we might be going for a second round of lockdown this coming autumn and winter, I'd had enough. I'd heard that in Sweden they'd done things differently. So I decided to fly there and find out more. To hear it from the horse's mouth. So I got the old camera out of the closet and came back to documentaries, if only for the sake of the future of my children. Trapped between the two extremes of coronavirus deniers and lockdown orthodoxy, I was intrigued by Sweden's approach. No lockdown, no school closures, no masks. So I managed to secure an interview with Chief Epidemiologist Anders Tegnell, whose resolve not to give in to world mainstream media pressure meant, among other things, that tango dancing was allowed in Stockholm. This journey was also a chance for me to dance the tango for the first time in 6 months, a dance form that encompasses the relationship between leaders and followers, the tension between fear and trust. Claudia Nye, I'm Anglo-Argentinian. I'm based in the UK, documentary filmmaker, very concerned about my country of origin, who have been in lockdown heading to the 6th month now. Very concerned as well about what's happening in the UK. I have been following your approach, and every time I have shared posts about your approach, I have been accused of being right-wing, or I have been told that it's because the Swedish have low population density. What would you say to these people?
First of all, I would very much deny that there's any kind of political signal in this. I don't think we are really concerned about if this is right-wing, left-wing, or middle path in any way. Second of all, I would definitely deny that Sweden is a densely populated country. Yes, it is, or less densely populated country than others. Yes, on the whole we are, of course, but if you look at the Stockholm region is very densely populated, at least as densely populated as Amsterdam, Brussels, so that's not an explanation.
With 12,000 people per square mile, Stockholm has the same population density as Manchester. According to the Imperial College of London model, the death toll in Sweden without lockdown would have been almost 80,000 by the end of June. And yet, their results were nowhere near these predictions.
Office closed down, so we all had to work from home. But my economy hasn't been affected at all, I would say.
My university is closed, so I study from home.
In the news, and they say like Sweden doesn't take it in like allvar, vad är det?
Seriously.
Like serious.
At first everyone was worried, but after a while it felt very okay to send the kids back to school and for them to have a normal life and for us to just practice social distancing. So it felt all right.
I think it's kind of hysterical, actually. It's not fact, I think. It's just easy political shots for the different governments. All from Trump saying, no, it's nothing, to somebody's shutting down the whole society.
I'm 16 years old and I went to school all last year and this year, and I'm glad that it stayed open. At one time there was rather many people who got sick and needed to stay at home, and there were many teachers at home at one point, I remember.
So tell me, when there were many teachers at home, did anybody die? Did anybody have any serious illness?
Not that I know.
I don't think so.
No. I think he's doing the right thing by not locking down Sweden. So I think it's good.
You feel safe?
Yeah, I feel safe. If you want to wear a mask, then do so. And I think that all of us, like younger people, we're not as affected as the older ones and people who's like sick or something. So I think that we can keep our distance and so on for them.
Are you able? Do you have a grandmother that you cannot visit? Or?
Yeah, I do, but I'm gonna actually visit her tomorrow, but outside. So we're gonna have dinner outside, and she has a house.
So, in Stockholm streets, I did meet plenty of people who had coronavirus or knew someone who had it in its mild form. However, I was struggling to find any elderly or vulnerable people on the streets. Where were they? Tegnell had given them the choice to stay at home and save their own lives. In the UK, the head of the NHS England claimed this to be age-based apartheid. At the same time, Age UK was stating that it is perverse to tell the vulnerable to stop shielding and go back to work. And yet, as the COVID infection rates were rising in the autumn, the government kept insisting that shielding was not necessary. I mean, what was going on? In the name of my children and all the younger generations, I would like to challenge this. Is it fair for the young, healthy and fit to be facing unreasonable restrictions at the start of their lives, to stop those at the end of theirs from shielding? I mean, there had been quarantines in the past, but quarantine means restricting the movement of those who are sick or vulnerable, which is what Tegnell had advised his population. Restricting the movement of the healthy is something altogether different. I traveled to the southern suburbs of Stockholm, where I met Eva.
I have struggled to find older people in the streets. You're the first one. So what do you say to shielding the vulnerable and letting the rest of the society cracking on?
I think it's been rather successful, and I'm rather pleased that he has done it his way. I mean, we have closed up ourselves.
Yeah. So tell me, have you been in touch with your grandchildren? How has that worked?
By telephone and outside. So, but she's very, very afraid that we should be contaminated. It's not the word.
Yeah.
Yes.
Contagious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she keeps really a distance, but they have come and visit. We eat together outside with a distance, but you have to think about it all the time, and it eats your brain.
Do you feel that Tegnell took care of the vulnerable with his approach?
Yes, I think so. Yes, I feel so. I think that it's time to get some kind of structure for us, the vulnerables. In the metro, for example, that the first wagon should be just for people who are vulnerable, and that all the shops and the pharmacies and everything should be there should be 1 hour when it's not permitted for the other ones to come.
It's a fantastic idea. Has it been proposed to
No,
Tegnell?
no, but I'm going to do it.
What do you think about the approach in the UK where they lock down the whole society, the schools, everything to protect the vulnerable? What do you think of that?
I think that's kind of torture. I don't know how people, what's the mental health risks, because if we feel this, yes, depression, how can they feel? How can I sitting in the apartment for so long time? It's not human.
So is there anything else that you would like to say to the people who are wanting the whole society to be in lockdown to protect the vulnerable? What would you say to them?
There are many ways to protect vulnerables. There isn't only one way. That's what I want to say.
So they are in it all together, but using their common sense. As Eva said, there's different ways to support the vulnerable. In Sweden, they are voluntarily self-isolating so that the rest can carry on studying and working towards supporting them. Eva even had some ideas as to how to improve on their situation and was going to propose them to her leader. In Tango, when the follower feels safe and trusts her leader, she can become creative and inventive, fully participating in the dance.
As we head into autumn, the mainstream media in the UK is threatening with a second wave, possibly leading to another lockdown again. Would you make any changes this winter from your approach so far?
No, we don't have any plans to change our approach. It's worked well so far, and we hope that it's going to continue to do that.
So tell me, how did you manage to resist the pan-global reaction and hold your nerve and stick to your guns?
I mean, of course, we are a rather big agency with a lot of experts here. We also have a lot of support from the political level. And we have an incredible support from the Swedish public, who has been very much in favor of what we are doing. So I think with that behind you, it's not so difficult for this agency to stick with the policy we have started on.
So why do you think your approach has been vilified by the mainstream media abroad?
I think it's been a mixed message. I mean, I think some media from other countries has also been quite positive and quite interested in what we are trying to do. And some media has not. And I think it's the same we have in Sweden. And that's probably the thing we have in media all the time. Some media wants to find faults, and other media are more interested in a curious way.
In a curious way. I liked that. I mean, if anything, curiosity seemed to have vanished from our society since March 2020. It was when the headlines started coming from Italy that fear started taking hold of Europe. And when Imperial College of London forecast 500,000 deaths in the UK if we did not act now, fear is one of the most powerful emotions. And since emotions are more powerful than thoughts, they can override common sense. It seemed that common sense had vanished. Mainstream media all seemed to agree with absolute certainty. We needed to close schools, cancel exams, shut down the entire country. No questions asked. And if you dared ask the questions the mainstream media was not asking, you were accused of being insensitive, or a conspiracy theorist, or even right-wing. I never thought of myself as being right or left-wing at that. I believe the bat needs both wings to fly. Anyway, here's Sean, and this is our story.
It's a wrap.
Back in January, before any of this started, We had booked our holiday to Sweden to visit some friends and dance the tango. By the time we got there, it had been banned everywhere else in Europe. We'd taken an interest in the Swedish approach to COVID, and whenever I posted anything on social media to share their good news, we were bombarded by the politically correct Guardian readership, telling us to check our sources before posting anything. So we decided to go to the source. I sent a letter to Tegnell on the off chance he'd reply, and he did. After over 20 years of having retired from the world of broadcast documentaries to become a mother, I felt a bit rusty and lacking in confidence. But Sean, being a photojournalist, convinced me. I think we make a good team. We went into Stockholm Old Town, beautiful tourism hotspot, Gamlastan, where they were suffering from the travel ban Europe had imposed on them for not having done lockdown.
Since we have our shops in a tourist area, it's been very bad.
Why?
Because no tourist has been able to come here, because Sweden has been looked upon as a very contagious place. I understand if people are afraid, but I cannot really see that it's been so bad here, because I've had my shop open this whole time and I never had a mask, and I just kept my distance to people. Now it hasn't been a lot of people either, but I've met people that have had corona, and I've known people that have had it and got well from it, so to speak. A lot of the death tolls, I think, is from the old folks' homes, which is sad, but wherever I have gone, I have been able to keep distance from people.
And how do you feel about the way the coronavirus has been tackled here by Tegnell?
It's hard to say. We haven't seen the end of it yet. Now I'm going to cough.
That's bad.
I always do that when I talk a lot.
That's the way you have to cough.
Yeah.
Perfect.
We do that.
Yeah. Do you want to
most of us
a glass of water? Or
maybe I should.
Yeah, go.
Let's see.
Like in the UK, the government had also financially compensated businesses. The difference is they were given the choice to remain open while respecting the social distancing rule.
There we go, it's your beer. I feel very sorry for the people in UK. Many restaurant owners are struggling with the economical circumstances that comes out of this, and probably many will go bankrupt or out of business because of the lockdown.
So the media was telling us that due to coronavirus, the economy was going into free fall. But was that the real cause? 6 months BC, that is, before coronavirus, the World Economic Forum had announced that China was taking a leading role in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and that it was dumping the world market prices, which was sending the neoliberal global free market economy into decline. And, talking about dumping, we ate the most delicious dumplings at Joel's restaurant.
Oh, nice. Tell me, what's that delicious looking thing?
It's a Swedish kroppkaka. The nearest explanation we have is Swedish dumplings. It's a big dumplings with potatoes around ham. I understand that Tegnell's way of doing it was not politically correct in Europe. I do understand that Europe's politician has been a group of sheep following the big sheep. And it's really sad to see Europe's politician behave like old Eastern Bloc Soviet politician.
Why? How come Tegnell could resist the enormous pressure?
Basic science and what has worked for others. You do not invent a new wheel, you use others' wheel. You try to be the second best. You are cautious.
Because they were accusing Tegnell of doing an experiment, but Tegnell said, no, Europe is doing an experiment. We are doing what we've always done. Could you comment on that?
I think Tegnell and Europe made a social experiment, but Tegnell did an experiment out of science and reason.
Boris Johnson kept saying we're following the science.
You can always follow the science, but if you want to follow the science right, you need to read a lot of science. You will always find some scientist who thinks your way, and you can always pay a scientist to think your way if you don't find it.
You can always pay a scientist to think your way. The world may be made of atoms, but humans are mostly made of stories. The question is, which story do you want to believe? As time went by, stories started multiplying about COVID-19. The novel virus had been engineered in a lab in China. Wealthy elites and satanic pedophiles had intentionally spread the virus to gain power and profit. COVID-19 was a hoax and no worse than yet another variation of the flu. The anti-vaxxers and the anti-5G were claiming it was Bill Gates and the big pharmaceutical giants. The environmentalists were suggesting it was planet Earth telling us to stop polluting it. That was my favorite one. Until AC, after Corona, ancient wisdom had it that we are all equipped with an immune system which can combat viruses if we lead a healthy enough lifestyle. They say it takes two to tango. A viral infection also needs two, a pathogen and a host. If the host is healthy, it can keep the pathogen at bay. Our health is largely in our hands. Through good food, drink, exercise, a social life, doing what you love, and plenty fresh air, we can strengthen our immune system. A full lockdown undermined most of these points. Why was there no mention of this in our networks?
How is this novel virus different to previous novel viruses to have exerted such a pan-global reaction?
That's a very good question. In many ways, it is not terribly different when it comes to mortality and morbidity than many other viruses we are living with. So why this has been, the reaction has been so high as it has been, I think is something we're going to discuss in the future. Of course, we need to handle it in different ways, but why the reactions have been so abrupt and so draconian, as they've been in many parts of the world, it's going to be an interesting discussion for the future.
An interesting discussion for the future. Tegnell was of course being cautious. Having lived half my life in Argentina and the other half in the UK, had shown me that the measure of a developed country is the measure of the distribution of its wealth. As much as I had struggled to find older people in the streets of Stockholm, I also struggled to find any poverty over there. One of the theories running was that all the draconian measures were designed towards a cashless society of microchipped people to stop tax avoidance, money laundering, tax evasion, and crime control. When coronavirus arrived in Europe, I was curious about how it seemed to be mainly hitting the world's major economies. In a riddle whose answer is excess, which is the one forbidden word? Maybe it was wishful thinking, but had COVID-19 come to the world to combat excess? And yet, during lockdown, the big giants kept growing, and the small businesses kept falling.
Where's my glasses? Here, can't see anymore. I am the blind leading the deaf. So what do you think about the social lockdown experiment being carried out by Europe and the rest of the world in the light of this novel coronavirus?
We are not really in a position to make any kind of judgment of the kind of measures different countries are taking. I think all countries are doing their best to stop this pandemic in the ways we have it at hand. In Sweden we have chosen a voluntary way, and it's proven to be sustainable, and it's proven also to be effective, even if maybe not as quick as some other sanctions, but it's sustainable in a way that not any other sanctions are, and we are quite happy with that. Other countries will now have to rethink what they're doing to a greater extent than we have to do, and we'll see where it's going to end up.
We'll see where it's going to end up. Was this the future? As it turns out, it's already the present in Sweden. We attended a microchipping party where Stockholmers meet for a couple of glasses of wine and a chip under their skin.
I have nothing to hide. I'm kind of trackable already, so it doesn't matter. But I'm not afraid of that. I'm not afraid of that, no.
I would say in 30 years' time, there's a pretty clean break between organic people and non-organic people. Not using technology to enhance themselves. It's like people saying no to healthcare today.
The prospect of a cash-free society of microchipped people was painted in a dystopian fashion in the UK. In Sweden, however, it felt more like utopia. We booked ourselves into a cabin in the archipelago in Stockholm. Soren, the host, called it heavenly place.
And I think all the media talking about how Sweden is doing the wrong way. We look in the media what they are writing, and they are not writing the whole thing. They are writing the headlines, and we are listening to that. We don't search for the real truth by our own.
Yes, and headlines, they are misleading.
Yes.
And then you read the article, and the article is truer than the headline, and people only read headlines.
Yes, they do. I have friends all over the world, and they are really afraid to visit Sweden. I'm a little surprised of how much they listen to media and don't search for their own
their own common sense, no? Because it's like I have to do quarantine when I go back to the UK because I came to Sweden.
Ah, okay.
And Sweden has a lower death rate than the UK.
Yes, that's.
So why do you think that they've punished Sweden like this? Because this is why you see no tourism.
I was waiting for Mr. Tegnell to crumble from his post after all this criticism from all over the world.
And why do you think he didn't?
I think he is the guy who really believed in his strategy.
Most people, a significant proportion of people will not get this virus at all at any point in the epidemic, which is going to go on for a long period of time. Of those who do, some of them will get the virus without even knowing it. They will have the virus with no symptoms at all, asymptomatic carriage, and we know that happens. Of those who get symptoms, the great majority, probably 80%, will have a mild or moderate disease, might be bad enough for them to have to go to bed for a few days, not bad enough for them to have to go to the doctor. An unfortunate minority will have to go as far as hospital, but the majority of those will just need oxygen and will then leave hospital. And then a minority of those will end up having to go to severe and critical care, and some of those, sadly, will die.
This is a disease that's mainly is hurting the very old, very vulnerable, very sick people.
At all stages, we have been guided by the science.
So, in a nutshell, both chief epidemiologists in the UK and Sweden were actually saying the same thing. So why were we being sent back into lockdown? The difference is that the Swedish government has no statutory powers over its public health agency, unlike in the UK.
I am not confident, and nor is anybody confident, that
if you don't follow the rules, the police will have the powers to enforce them, including through fines and dispersing gatherings.
Many claimed that the reason the Swedish people had not needed to be locked down is that they are more responsible and sensible than the British people. Really? I may not be an epidemiologist or a scientist, but I am a relationship counselor, and this much I know. Every person is okay, and positive relationships increase feelings of being okay. Life is not so much about what happens to us, but more about how we respond. Transactional analysis is a method of therapy where social transactions are analyzed to determine the root cause of dysfunctional relationships. So, basically, we all inhabit three ego modes: the parent, the adult, and the child. This theory is based on the fact that we've all been children, we've all been parented, and hopefully we've all become adults. Our parenting and childhood are the software, and our adulthood the hardware, so to speak. And when we relate to other people, we have to bear in mind that they are also carrying this software. So a relationship is healthy when the communication between two people is parallel. So, adult to adult, we can plan ahead, start a family, buy a house. Child to child, we can go dancing, have fun, we can be silly together. Parent to parent, we can bring up kids, pets. Trouble ensues when the relationship becomes crossed, and one party is in parent mode while the other goes into child mode. So, when Boris imposes a national lockdown, instilling fear in the population, giving conflicting orders, threatening with fines, bringing in the police or even the army, he is establishing a dysfunctional relationship with people. A relationship based on fear, bringing out in them either the rebellious child or the fearful child. By imparting consistent guidelines, placing responsibility in the people, Tegnell, on the other hand, is establishing a functional relationship based on trust.
They have put a lot of responsibility on the individual citizen to judge for themselves. And I think it's been working pretty good in Sweden. I have big confidence for our authorities and our leaders.
And I wonder how he can be the only crazy guy in the world. So, and he's still there. And I wonder how he could be so strong. I have seen so many men and women in great position who had resigned after so much criticism, and he's still there.
And here is our heavenly place for the night. But before that, Soren had a question for Tegnell.
One of my questions is, how many over death is it in our country?
Food for thought. The subject of excess deaths is crucial. If we look at the monthly deaths per million in Sweden along the years, here's the Spanish flu spike. You may be wondering, well, where's COVID then? Here it is. This is just to put things into perspective.
Why are deaths counted with COVID as opposed to from COVID? And has this contributed to the pandemic?
Yes, I think it has contributed because especially since the group that gets very severely ill from COVID-19 is the group who has a fairly low life expectancy, who has a lot of other diseases and a high risk of dying for many different causes within the next few months. So of course the figures are higher than it should be otherwise. On the other hand, we need to have a system in place where we really clearly and transparently shows the problems with this pandemic, and that's why we have chosen this path. And I think it's, in the end, it's good because we have been incredibly transparent around it. And if you to that add the excess mortality, which we also are doing, I think you can get a quite good picture. But of course, the focus on the exact numbers, I think, has been rather unfortunate because it does not really reflect how the pandemic is working.
For example, to illustrate how the pandemic is working in terms of deaths from COVID, only 872 deaths were directly caused by the COVID-19 virus. People whose immune system was sadly compromised and couldn't fight it. The blue curve, which is the one shown around the world, represents deaths with COVID. That is, people with other comorbidities who were already dying of other reasons and happened to test positive at the time they passed away. Life comes with death attached, and every year a big number of people, sadly, die. Here is a graph depicting the viral curve in European countries. It just goes to show that the virus did what the virus was going to do, with or without lockdown, in the case of Sweden. If you look at this graph displaying deaths in Europe, we can see that in 2018 there was excess deaths of 140,000. When we move on to 2020, we notice that in 2019 there was a very soft flu season. So we had built up a lot of people here who would have otherwise sadly passed away. So when COVID-19 struck, all those elderly and vulnerable people were sadly prey of it. Had we become so concerned about staying alive that we were forgetting what being alive is all about? As for the other Nordic neighboring countries who boasted lower COVID death rates than Sweden, they had not had that soft flu season in 2019. I was running out of my allotted time, but I had one final question for Tegnell, the very reason that got me to write to him.
So, have there been any casualties from having left schools open?
When we look at teachers in Sweden, how many of them get admitted to hospitals with COVID-19, they have a lower risk than almost any other profession. I think that they are, if anything, protected by being at school, not put at risk.
And many parents are worried about their children. What would you say to reassure them?
This is a disease that's mainly is hurting the very old, very vulnerable, very sick people. So children are not at a very high risk. They're at a much higher risk from a number of other diseases than from this one.
So, did this mean we had closed all schools, cancelled all exams and interrupted education for 6 months in the UK, compromising the future of our children? For nothing?
I'm a very large school. I have 1,300 students and 130 staff in 2 buildings. See, I've still got family in the UK and I follow the news and talk to my family.
I think it must be very difficult now. I think it's such a shame the school's closed. I mean, if I'm going to be honest, I wish you hadn't. Like anything, you can be nervous and you can be worried, but we found it's created this amazing team spirit in our school, and we help each other. It is a Swedish way of dealing with a crisis, slowly, carefully, listening, using as much scientific information as possible. We've had a social democratic government for many years. There is this, what we call in Sweden, this solidarity, this idea of thinking about everybody. You might have heard we've got quite a high tax rate in Sweden, but a lot of us believe that that is for the greater good, so that we can have a great healthcare system and that we can provide for the people in Sweden. The LAGOM way.
Lagom is, we are neither this or that, but we are lagom.
Not lockdown and not virus denying, but I mean, you have to keep distance.
We could be better, but I don't think we're not good.
Yeah, I think Sweden has tackled the lagom way.
So tell me one more. What is this Swedish lagom way? Can you tell me?
The Swedish lagom means that we do just enough of everything. And I think that's a principle that is quite good to stand on. We don't want to hurt any more than necessary, but we want to have as good as effect as possible. And the question is keeping that kind of balance, not doing things that will hurt, for example, school children more than necessary, but still gives us a safe environment and a reasonable development of our pandemic.
Thank you.
This LAGOM way resonated with the basics of Tango. Slowly, careful, cautious, listening, remaining aware of the wider community, instilling trust in the partner. When a leader doesn't listen, abruptly changing his moves without warning or care, unaware of the group, bumping into people, he will be instilling confusion and fear in his partner. The dance falls apart and the follower won't give him another chance. So, up to here goes our journey. I wish world leaders admitted that lockdown did not work. I do hope followers don't give them another chance.